Great, thanks. All right, so hi. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Katie Coleman, and I am a lecturer at the English Language Institute at U of M. So I will be describing the VR activity that I created along with Brian Derry for two English for Academic Purposes courses that I teach at the ELI. So first, I'll give you some context about my classes and then explain why I chose to create this type of activity. So these courses were two interactive speaking courses for international graduate students and undergraduate students. So as classes went remote in 2020, I wanted to ensure that my students could still feel connected to campus and still have access to the language being spoken on campus, even if classes are being held remotely. So role plays and video and audio can only get you so far. So I thought that VR could be a good way of creating tasks that were learner-centered, communicative, that could provide them with access to authentic language, practice in a safe environment, could prepare them for participating in their campus communities. Of course, all while meeting ELI speaking course learning objectives. So existing literature finds that VR activities can engage students, increase motivation, provide meaningful learning and cultural information. They can reduce anxiety by providing learners with safe environments to practice speaking. And they can also help learners develop autonomy, self-efficacy, and language competence. And they can also increase access to language and cultural learning for people that might not be able to be physically present, like when social distancing. And access continues to improve as costs for headsets lower. And actually, many activities can be done via desktop if you don't have access to a headset. So I'll briefly walk through the steps we took when developing the project and then show you how it turned out. So we had 3 phases to the project. We're currently in the second phase. First, we developed the experience using the VR software, editing software, Uptail. And then we piloted it on my students and gathered feedback. And next, we plan, hopefully, to create additional activities. So I don't have time to go into this in any detail, but long story short, you can see that developing a VR activity can take a lot of time and have many different steps. So I do imagine, though, hopefully, that each time you go through this process, it will go faster. Okay, so to show you how it all turned out, I'll be showing you screenshots of the activity. So note that the images that you see are small screenshots. They were shot with 360-degree camera, so students can actually look all around them, right? So in this activity, the students were tasked with finding their professor for an office hour appointment and then asking for help along the way. They'll interact with people that they see. My students were given the option of doing this with a headset or on their desktop, and this time around, everybody chose to do it on a desktop in a web browser. So once the student kind of looks around outside, figures out what to do, they can actually walk into the building. This is Weiser Building on campus. They can walk around and kind of look at different things, clicking on different things for more information. The way that they walk around is similar to Google Street View. So in this scene, the student can click on the button in the image on the left, which will trigger a speaking prompt, which you see in the middle, along with directions. So in this case, they need to ask the student directions to the elevators, right? And so in this scene, what we did was program the software to listen for certain keywords like elevator. And then once the software heard that word, it would trigger whatever comes next. So in this case, it would be a video of the student kind of giving directions to the elevator. So throughout the experience, the student could make choices about where they wanted to go, what they wanted to do next. In this case, this is actually Amelia. They could actually ride up the elevator with a student and have a chance to practice small talk in the elevator. It was kind of fun. So here, the student is prompted to interact with another person as they make their way to office hours. And similar to before, the software could pick up on a certain keyword to trigger the next scene. In this case, would trigger her reply to the person. All right, so now they have made it to their professor's office. This scene, it's actually the ELI director and associate director, so it is helpful if you have willing participants to be actors in your activity. So once they watch a short clip of the professor inviting them to come into their office, they can walk toward the office and sit down to actually get at eye level with the professor. So just a side note, when you film, it's actually pretty important to consider what will be eye level for the participants, right? As well as like how close or how far you are to the person that you're talking to. So just interesting things to think about. All right, so in this scene, the office hour has actually begun, and the student has different choices about what they want to practice, and they can practice all three scenarios, and they can actually practice as many times as they would like. So each scenario contains a different speaking prompt, like ask about internship opportunities, ask for a letter of recommendation, etc. And then once they have finished, asking and participating, it will trigger a response, like a recorded response from the professor. So they can actually get a recording of their talk and then listen to that as many times as they would like. Okay, so at the end of the experience, the students are actually given the opportunity to go back and do it all again. So this is a pretty safe environment where students can just practice and do it on their own time, practice again and again and again. All right, so when I implemented it in class, I received mostly positive reactions to it. So I gave them a survey, and most students agreed that they learned something new about campus culture. They gained confidence speaking English. They could practice speaking and listening skills. They were comfortable speaking, and that the language was actually realistic that they heard. So many students said that they loved the experience. They said that it was interesting, realistic, instructions were clear, good experience. But on the other hand, there definitely were some frustrations, mostly stemming from tech issues like long loading times, or the computer couldn't actually understand what they were saying. So important things to think about. Okay, so now we're thinking about what will come next, and just, I don't have much time, so I'll go through these quickly, but some takeaways that we had were that mainly these can be very time consuming, which you have to think about, will creating these activities be sustainable for a busy teacher? Also, it's pretty easy to get swept up in the cool factor. And so we definitely need to stay focused on the learning objectives throughout the whole process. Also, there's an opportunity to consider representation. So who are we including as actors in the activities? Also considering potential accessibility issues like access to internet, or physical challenges like people feeling dizzy as they go. Also, like we experience the ability or not of the VR software to recognize different accents. So next steps for us include developing tools for assessment, for assessing learner outcomes, providing feedback to students, also finding ways to save time, and perhaps maybe looking into kind of creative classroom activities where like maybe the students themselves can create the VR activities. Like that. So so we learned a lot from our pilot project, and we are excited to see what comes next. Thanks.
All right, Larry, I have your presentation pulled up so I can share and we can get rolling with your part.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
So can you see my slideshow?
I can see the slideshow. This is perfect. Thank you very much. Okay.
Let's just test to make sure I can. Did you see that I changed the slide?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Really, really good. Okay. Hi. My name is Larry Gand. I am a faculty at the School of Social Work here at the University of Michigan. And I wanted to provide an interesting kind of summary with lots and lots of lessons learned about digital and brave spaces for social work education, stepping back and moving forward. And so as we go to the next slide, there were a couple of things that we learned, but let's talk about the motivation for the project. And it's something that is called in adult education an awful lot, and we use it at the School of Social Work as well, transformative learning. And so it's a really interesting strategy, which basically says that the process of perspective transformation, not just learning facts, but learning how to change perspectives. That takes 3 dimensions, a kind of a psychological change in understanding who the person is, a convictional kind of approach, a revision of belief systems, and behavioral. So changes in lifestyle. So this is not about learning facts and information and being able to regurgitate or present them. It's really about a transformation of self-perspective, attitudes, assumptions, and changes in lifestyles. Quite honestly, the transformative learning is very, very principal in a pedagogy for adult learning, in which the learner draws upon prior years of experience in the real world to facilitate the process. And so right there, you can hear, you can see some of the, this is a nice idea, but if you're kind of young, you may not have as many prior years of experience to draw on in the real world to facilitate the process. The challenge was this, and this is an interesting challenge. Our graduate program years ago was really geared toward an older audience of people who basically returned after raising families, after one career, to get an advanced degree after years of work and career and family and travel. Over the years at our school, the demographics have changed dramatically. And so now the MSW program attracts a majority of undergraduates who come in literally from maybe 4 years in an undergraduate program, straight from high school, without any kind of work or lived experiences. And so what happens is that we've got eager and sincere students, but they have less work history, less familial history, and community experiences, and in general, a lot less real world experiences. So they come into the program with a lot less familiarity with the ideas, people and communities that really are different from their own experiences. So as a result, sometimes there are some issues, some concepts, some activities that the students get really anxious about because there's not a frame of reference for taking risks in learning and thinking differently, okay? So the opportunity was that what we called digital brave spaces was to provide students with an opportunity to practice the skills and knowledge that they learned in other courses with a learning space, kind of the VR learning space that will reflect a non-judgmental atmosphere wherein failures are situations and not to performance. So we have a lot of people that have performance anxiety, they're anxious, they'll say the wrong thing, and they think if they say the wrong thing that people won't ever forget them. There'll be a real severe mark in their work, in their evaluations going forward here. And so for that reason, people are just afraid to make mistakes. They're afraid to take risks in learning. And so one of the challenges was that this project will maybe help us create a learning space that will really reflect the non-judgmental atmosphere where failures are fine. You can fail because you're learning. Sometimes learning is success and sometimes it's failure. So the project was to allow us to study, create, facilitate, and try to use digitally creative brave spaces that would modify risk and reward learning, and training spaces and opportunities, okay? So as we go to the next slide, we found that, why? Well, we talked a little bit about it a few minutes ago. The thought was that we could utilize virtual worlds, digital spaces to experiment with student thinking. We could explain how learning environments conveying learn through difficulty norms support difficulty as importance interpretations. So you learn, and it's hard work, but that's okay because difficulty is important. It's not unimportant, but it is important. So struggle is really good in an educational experience to learning sense. And then finally, we wanted to describe how XR environments can provide the comfort to experience different viewpoints while simultaneously placing students in situations that evoke real, genuine emotions, okay? So that was the goal. When we didn't quite get there, but we learned an awful lot, okay? So let's look at what happened. We started off with scripting scenarios, which was a learning piece for me in terms of really coming up with certain kinds of applications wherein an experience had to be scripted, response, kind of in some communities and in some learning circles, we call it call and response. So there is a comment that's made and a response, and then follow-up comment and a response. And sometimes they're they're improvised, and other times they're not basically. So that was the thought. However, what happened is this: the students actually decided to work with scripting scenarios. So one of them was basically conflict resolution, and then another one was identifying people in the community and kind of engaging those people in the community to engage in community organizing or practices. One of the problems was that as students began to come up with these really allegedly simple scripting scenarios, there'd be conflicting best practices, challenges, confusion about what was the right approach, the correct approach, and optimal approach. So all of a sudden, there's lots of concerns about, well, if I say this, I might be offensive to somebody. How do I handle a comment that is problematic? So we realized, because actually we tried an awful lot, and we actually couldn't use a lot of the applications that we had wanted to. But we did a debrief, and we realized that our principal goal that we wanted would not lead to the outcome that we envisioned. Okay, what did we learn? Well, first of all, we learned that our goal was ambitious, but it was imprecise and misleading. The goal was not to train students with a scripting scenario, but it was to really have students experience changes in personal understanding, experience revision in belief systems, consider and incorporate behavioral changes in lifestyle and or professional comportment, okay? And so those were critical goals. The students were a bit embarrassed because as we explained this and as the lessons learned became evident, the students kind of acknowledged, Dr. Gant, we actually don't know an awful lot about XR, VR, and how it could really be useful. And so there was a little bit of embarrassment because students felt, well, this is part of, the new generations. We should know about all of this, right? And the answer was, well, not exactly, but that's okay. If you go to the next slide. So we learned an awful lot. And what we decided to do as a school and as a diversity, equity, and inclusion project was to do a little bit of stepping back. But so we came up with a couple of ideas, and I'll talk about one very briefly here, and then I think we're done for the program, or I'm done for at least my presentation anyway. And so the first was maybe take a step back from the narrative and really suggest that we look at creating a digital brave space for something a little different. And the students resonated to this idea. Right now in the School of Social Work, we're just returning to campus and normal life. But at the same time, our curriculum has also expanded to include not only in-class real-time activities, but lots of synchronous and asynchronous sections and programs as well too. And so we came to realize that our DE&I office reached out to people in one environment, but not the virtual environment. And so one of the suggestions that I came up with was to really create a virtual DEI office for our hybrid virtual MSW program. the students resonated with that and said, okay, that sounds like something that we can really grab onto and do some thinking about. So that's the initial approach that we're going to begin, hopefully, in the spring, summer of 2022. In the fall of 2022, we hope to talk about another program that we don't have time to talk about here, but this is basically using what we learned, and maybe what other people have learned in their experimentations as well, to create a kind of a holistic anti-racism immersion lab, but we'll save that for another time and date and place, okay? I think that's it for my time. Thank you very much. And thanks, Amelia.
Absolutely. I will now be sharing a presentation video from faculty who unfortunately could not make it today, so I will get that started shortly. Oh my. They sent me an MP3 and I need one moment, please.
Page. So we had this project called Virtual Interactions in Seoul for our intermediate level Korean class. We piloted this last fall semester. The reason we came up with this project was because we have study abroad program where we take our students to Korea in May, but that has been canceled for 3 years due to the pandemic. So, well, the procedure of making the modules, I believe, is pretty much the same or very similar to what the ELI did for their project. So we're gonna just skip to the content of our modules. So we had two modules. One was called Shopping in Seoul, and this is directly related to our textbook conversations, where in the textbook conversation, students get to shop in Korea for their clothing items. So in this module, they do exactly the same. So as you see on these screenshots, this person in white shirt is pretending to be the student's friend, and she's asking the student, like, what kind of clothing item are you shopping for today? And she also looks at the map and like, how can we get to the clothing store in the huge shopping mall? And in the third screen shot at the bottom left, the student also gets to talk to the store owner to pick the shirt that he or she wants. And lastly, they also get to buy some Korean traditional souvenirs in the mall. And the second module, which is food delivery at the Han River, the student visits a park and he or she is supposed to meet with a friend, but this friend is late, so he calls the student. So in the first screenshot, the friend is calling the student and says, like, I'll be late, but can you please order chicken for us before I get there so we can just have it when I get there. And that is kind of a mission in the game. So the student gets a mission from the friend, and to get the chicken delivered, the student has to get the restaurant information from strangers who's eating chicken in the park, which is like a unique aspect of Korean culture. You can order food to an open space. So in the second screenshot, the student asks information from the strangers, and the third screenshot, the student gets to talk to the person in the restaurant to order the food. And if he or she has the right information, then finally the delivery guy will come and get you the chicken and beverage. So, as I said, we did this in the intermediate Korean class, and after the 2 sessions with these 2 modules, they gave us some feedback about their experiences. We categorized their feedback into 3 parts: cultural awareness, linguistic benefits, and what they felt about the VR technology they used. So for the cultural awareness, they mentioned the things that when we designed this project, we didn't really think about, or we didn't really imagine that students will mention these things. But things like, in South Korea, people delivering by motorcycle, and delivery services look much more efficient in South Korea. So those like cultural aspects that we instructors thought kind of obvious, or it was just too apparent for us, so we didn't really mention in class. They mentioned about that in their feedback form. And for linguistic benefits, it was kind of expected. That was what we were hoping for the students to gain from these experiences. So they said, well, it was cool to listen to a native speaker in the VR modules, and also they noticed like the specific linguistic usages, like honorifics, spoken by the native speakers to us specific people. And also about the VR technology, they thought it was really amazing to be able to talk to the VR headsets, and they understand them, the headsets understand them. But at the same time, they had difficulty moving on in some modules, in some parts, because of technical difficulties, which we'll mention in the next slide.
Okay, let me talk about.
Apologies all, we have to move on to the next session, so I need to leave here, which means I need to leave with the screen share. As I said in the chat, I will make sure to make this presentation available for you all to view after the summit. Thank you all for coming.